Hello from Ovation of the Seas. This is Royal Caribbean's Quantum class ship. I am here in Ensenada, Mexico right now. We sailed out of the port of Los Angeles a couple days ago on a 3-night sailing. Now, right now, this ship is currently sailing out of Los Angeles, but it will be going back to Singapore for a short time sailing. And then next summer, Ovation of the Seas will be sailing out of Alaska on one-way sailings from Seward, Alaska to Vancouver, British Columbia. So if you're looking to book a cruise on Ovation of the Seas or any Royal Caribbean ship, contact me. The link's in my bio, but here we go. I'm going to take you on a tour of Ovation of the Seas. We're going to start right here on deck 15. Now, this is going to be your sports court, your top deck of the ship, your running trail. You're going to see all the fun activities happening out here outside to get that sun. And the sun is finally coming out after a couple days of fog and rain. But we're going to take a look at the pool decks and the Flowrider, as well as the RipCord by iFLY. That's all happening here on deck 15. Let's take a look. So now we're in the SeaPlex here on Ovation of the Seas. This is going to be a multi-purpose area. We have bumper cars, there's roller skating, there is a dodgeball tournament later. They have stuff going on in here all the time. This is a great indoor space, and everybody, families get to come and spend time together, enjoy each other's company, get out of the sun, and really just enjoy the SeaPlex. So we're on the bottom floor right now of the SeaPlex, and the second floor is gonna have an Xbox gaming center, foosball, ping pong, there's archery, there's cornhole, which is what I call it in Texas. But there is so much happening in this area. There's also a family-friendly arcade, so let's go check it out. Also, there was a crazy pickleball tournament happening in the SeaPlex yesterday, because if you know Royal Caribbean, you know Royal Caribbean loves pickleball. So there was some serious competitioning happening. Just check your cruise planner and they will let you know what's happening here in the SeaPlex at any given time. All right, here on Ovation of the Seas, the North Star is an extra experience. Now, this is going to raise you up in a gondola 300 feet above sea level. So on port days, it is a free complimentary experience, but you do need to sign up in the app as soon as you connect to the ship Wi-Fi once you're on board. Now, if you want to do it at sea day, it's going to be an extra cost per person, but well worth it. I did it yesterday at sea and it was amazing. Can you imagine being in Alaska, going up in the North Star and seeing those views? So it's going up right now, slowly but surely. It's like a 15-minute experience all the way up and all the way down, but views for days. So definitely check this out next time you're here on Ovation of the Seas. All right, now we are headed down to deck 14 on Ovation of the Seas. This is going to be your main pool deck area. Some really cool spaces, so let's go check it out. I am now in the indoor pool space here on Ovation of the Seas. Now this is the indoor pool. They have 2 hot tubs, they have a very large pool behind me, a smaller pool for like lounging, and there's a pool bar. Now this is open for everyone. Kids are welcome in this space. Can you imagine being in Alaska and having indoor pool and indoor hot tubs with views? Because there is glass literally everywhere in here. This is an amazing space. So it's right in between the main pool deck and the solarium on deck 14. We're headed into the solarium next, so let's go check it out. right, so deck 13 is mainly staterooms, so we're going to skip that deck for now and headed down to Adventure Ocean on deck 12 and 11. All right, so now we are headed down to deck 5 because all of these floors right here are just going to be staterooms. Now, I have done stateroom tours. That will be in a separate video, which is really cool. I got access to so many different room categories. But we're going to go check out kind of the main Royal Promenade area on deck 5. All right, we are now in deck 5 on Ovation of the Seas. Now, this behind me is going to be our Royal Theater. This is a gorgeous, huge space, 2 floors, and just gives you tons of seating for all the shows and entertainment that happen in the evenings right here on Ovation of the Seas. So definitely check your cruise planner when you get on board and go see all the shows, all the fun nighttime entertainment. But this is where it's going to be right here on deck 5 on Ovation of the Seas. We are now on deck 4 on Ovation of the Seas, and this is going to be your Royal Esplanade. This is kind of your main thoroughfare where you get your coffee, your pizza, and you go shopping. Now we're in port right now, so the shops are not open, but let's walk around and take a look at deck 4 here on Ovation of the Seas. All right, I'm now here in deck 3 of Ovation of the Seas, and we have hit up the casino. We are at port so that everything's closed, but we can walk through, so let's go take a look. On deck 3, we are also going to have some main dining room. We have the Grande and Chic. These are just 2 areas. You will get assigned dining with an assigned time for dining each night, unless you do my time dining, as well as an assigned table. You'll have the same wait staff each night, so they really get to know you and what you prefer. If you need Diet Coke, if your kids need French fries and chicken nuggets, they will make sure that you are totally taken care of while you're here. So let's go check out these dining rooms.